So this is making and negotiating deals, right? So we're going to move along here. First things first, we always start with what successful agents do every single day. They grow their business. They run their business, certainly showing buyers houses and negotiating contracts and stuff like that. And this is the run your business side that we're focusing on today. So let's talk about the offer process for a minute before we get deep into negotiations. Quickly throw up in chat, if you would, how many of you have actually been involved in a successful deal that's gone all the way to the closing table? And how many of you have not yet? I just kind of want to get a sense of where we are as a group. There's 11 of us here. And I suspect in Ignite, usually we have a lot of folks who haven't yet. They're working on it. They're hoping to get one there. I see some not yets in the chat. Okay. So
what was the question?
The question was, how many of you had successfully closed a real estate transaction in your career so far? Ariane, you have, my dear. Congratulations to you. You can raise your hand. All right. A couple things I want to share with you. In the Ignite 2.0 toolkit, all right, and remember where that is. You go into your internet site, you go to Keller Williams University, you go to Ignite 2.0 course. There's a toolkit. And the toolkit has in it some checklists for you. And some of the checklists are like this one. This is a checklist on what to do to prepare to write an offer. And it goes through all the different things. Make sure you've got the pre-approval letter. You know, do a CMA to help guide the buyers into, you know, what's going on in the market so they can make an intelligent offer. Review tax records, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not going to go through the checklist in totality right now. What I want you to know is there is one there. It is in the toolkit. I want you to download it, and I want you to have it, and I want you to add to it anything that's unique that you think would be useful for you in the way that you run your business. But to prepare to write your offer here, you got to have a system, right? You've got to have a system to make sure that you've got everything in place, right? And here's how the process works. If you've not done this before, the buyer typically makes the offer. Now, I'm going to stop for just a second to say is in life, in real estate, there's always exceptions. We think about the offeror, the person making the offer. We think about the offeree, the person receiving the offer. And sometimes what you're going to find is when you're a seller, when you're a listing agent, you're going to find sometimes that there's buyers that keep coming back. They're hanging around. They've seen the house 2 times. They bought their contractor. They bought their mama. And there just doesn't seem to be an offer. There's nothing that precludes you from, as a seller, from opening up the conversation by submitting the offer to the buyer. I have coached many, many agents in that very same scenario to say, okay, let's flush them out. We know there's interest, but they haven't been able to pull the trigger. Let's get this conversation started, and we craft the offer as the seller. And we go to the buyer's agent and we say, you know what? We see that you brought your customers back more than one time. They've asked a lot of questions. Here's what we're going to do. Houses on the market right now for $499,000. What we would do for them is we would be willing to go down to $489,000, and we're going to propose a 45-day close. And they write the contract up and they present it to the buyer, and then we get the conversation started. Right? You can do that. You don't have to always wait for the buyer to make the first move, right? But typically that's the way it works. The buyer makes an offer. And then one of the things happens. A couple of things happens. Either let's go all the way to the middle here. The seller responds in one of 3 ways. Either they can accept the offer and say, oh my God, this is beautiful. I can't believe I've got such a wonderful offer. And then we just jump right over into the contract to close process, which here in New Jersey involves a attorney review period, which is a cooling off period. Who knows how long attorney review period once it goes to the attorney? Who knows how long attorney review lasts once it gets to the attorney? Anybody remember that from real estate school?
3 days.
Very good answer, but the wrong one. And it was a trick question. I kind of set you up. I apologize, Natalie. I don't mean to set you up. That was mean. What we get confused in sometimes is once it gets to the attorney, it's indefinite. What we have is 3 days to get it to the attorney.
Oh, right.
Right. And so, and the reason why I bring this up that way is because a lot of times people forget that they expect that process should last no longer than 3 days. Now, the truth is it's a cooling off period. The state says, look, you are not an attorney and you've bound someone into a legally binding contract, and you're not an attorney, so they have the right to have an attorney review it, but they don't have forever to do it. Get to the attorney in 3 days. If the 3 business days come and go and an attorney has not changed this contract in any way, then what you wrote is going to stick. And so you get it to the attorney, and the first thing the attorney does actually is they cancel the contract. They write a letter that says, I represent Hal in the purchase of this home, and I hereby cancel this contract, which they have authority to do because the attorney is actually an officer of the court in the state of New Jersey, and they have the legal jurisdiction to kill a contract. And they say, but we would propose a couple of different things. Here's how we would change it. And if we change it in this way and we come to an agreement, we'll rebind this contract again. Think about it like a double hung window. At some point when you have an offer and acceptance, the window is closed and it's locked. We go to the attorney review process. They cancel the contract. The window's open again. And until that meeting of the minds happens in the attorneys could lock this back down again, anything can happen. You don't have a binding contract anymore. Anybody is free to walk away. People are free to accept other offers. It's just a really vulnerable time. So the goal is, don't keep it in. Once that contract has been killed in that attorney review process, get it patched back up again quickly. That's why it's really critical, in my estimation, to work with real estate attorneys. And we have a preferred attorney list that we can share with you, because the real estate attorney already knows the standard contract. They know what's in it. They know what they would change in it. They've already got their responses templated out, as opposed to when you're allowing perhaps your brother-in-law, who's a patent lawyer, or somebody who practices some other kind of law, handle this. Then they actually have to read the whole thing. And in reading the whole thing, they're apt to overinterpret. And it just becomes really slow and really complicated, and deals don't usually come together that well. But what we do is, that's number one. They accept the offer. Now, the other thing they could do is they could reject the offer outright. You know what? What were you thinking? Did your mama drop you on your head as a baby? What made you think that this was a good offer? Go away and don't come back and ever talk to me again. What I'll tell you is that's a rookie mistake. And when we get into the negotiating side of this later, negotiating by not countering is a move that's happened when you've let your emotions get the best of you. And professional negotiators try to avoid allowing that to happen, because the moment you stop the communication, then you can't move forward anymore. It's not being a tough guy. A lot of times people believe that you're hiring me to be a pit bull. No, you're hiring me to get this deal done. And more often than not, when you dig in and you refuse to counter and you refuse to keep the conversation moving, things fall apart. Usually what happens, an offer comes through, there's a response from the seller, and they say, I don't like this offer. They reject it, but then they make a counter offer and they become the offeror, and the buyer becomes the offeree. Remember, you can start right with that process if the buyer's hanging around, and smoke them out of the woods and see what's happening. But then we have negotiation. And when we get to a meeting of the minds and we have a fully signed contract executed by all the parties, and it is in the possession of all the parties, it's legally binding. And so in the possession of all the parties means not necessarily that the buyer and seller have their own individual copies of it. As long as their agents have copies of it, it's seen as in the possession, right? But that's when the clock starts. Now it's legally binding. Now you've got 3 business days to go to an attorney and decide if you're going to change it. But that's kind of the process here. Any questions around how that looks before we move on? If not, we'll just move on. Offer writing guidelines. Just like there's a checklist for how to prepare to write an offer, if you go into the toolkit in Ignite, you're going to find a checklist for how to write an offer. Make sure that you think about the price and terms, and make sure that you've reviewed all the seller's disclosure before you write this offer up. The sellers are required to disclose everything of material nature that could impact the buyer's desirability to purchase that home. Now, they're not required to fill out that standard New Jersey Association of Realtors disclosure document. There's a document that's been created that we just use to make it easy. It's about 6 or 8 pages long that says, here, fill this out, and then let's make this available to the buyers to review. They're not required to do it that way, but they are required to disclose anything that's important that you ask about. And so make sure that you reviewed all the disclosures and make sure that there's not something in there that would cause you to think differently about the property that you're about to make an offer on. Make sure that you reviews the lead paint disclosures and all that stuff, right? Make sure that you review what's conveying with the property. We're buying real property, which includes the home, the land, and all the attachments, right? All the attachments. And so, trees are attachments, right? You can't dig a tree out of the ground and take it with you, although I know someone who did. The tree was given to her. It was an olive tree given to her by her grandfather on her wedding day. And when they decided to move their home, they contracted a landscaper. They took it out, they put it on a cart, and they took it away. And when the new buyers moved in, they're like, wait, what happened to that tree? You can't do that unless you acknowledge that it's going to be excluded in the contract, right? Earnest money, how much money is going to be put down into escrow, all that stuff, right? Go through this checklist, make sure that you're working through this. And again, guys, it really pays in your very first time. I really do believe that it pays to partner with an agent who's already done this a few times. I think your first time you do anything, it's great to do it with a guide. If you ever wanted to climb Mount Everest, you're probably going to hire a Sherpa because they know the ropes and they can get you there safely. I think in the first couple of transactions, the first buyer side deal, the first listing side deal, it probably pays to partner up with an agent who's done some of this before, who can walk you through and make sure that you're doing things the right way, right? But use the guide. I think the guide will really help you to make sure that you've got this checklist here, that you're thinking about all the important things. You could consider, if you want to, writing a cover letter. What we know is that people sell houses to people. And the more they can learn about your clients, sometimes the more you can kind of get them to like your folks and think favorably about your folks. Just understand that this is commonly done. And I leveraged this to the hilt when I was actively selling. I even recorded little videos, just to try to get people to kind of fall in love with my family. Don't be surprised, though, if this doesn't get reviewed. Increasingly, there is sort of a tone in this industry that says, you know what, let's review the offer first. Let's not complicate this. I don't want my seller who's reviewing the offer to make a decision based on the fact that they really love that family with the cute little girl, as opposed to the family that didn't have a cute little girl, right? Because now what you have here is a protected class violation. Right? We start to think about all the different protected classes that are out there. Family status is one of them. And so anytime that the decision is made on anything other than dollars and terms of the contract itself, you do run the risk of being accused of a bias. And so increasingly what you're hearing is attorneys recommending and listing agents recommending that they don't want to review this letter until after they've decided to accept or reject the contract. If they accepted your contract, then they would be maybe willing to take a look at that letter. But don't be surprised if you get a little pushback on that. But you could do that, right? And so think about that. Now, presenting the offer, we're going to move quick. When you're presenting the offer to the other side, if you're the buyer side, notify the listing agent that you've got an offer, right? Send the offer to the other agent. Now, in a longer negotiating class, when I do a full class on how to negotiate the terms of a contract, I really do recommend that you try to negotiate in person as much as you can and say, look, I've got an offer. I'd love to come over and meet with you and your sellers to present it in person. Because what I find is if you can negotiate in person, people to people can solve problems in real time. You can control the narrative. You can control how that offer is presented so that if there's any element that is not perhaps to their liking, that we make sure that we don't lead with that, right? And so if you can, I'm a big fan of presenting in person, but let them know that the offer is coming. Send the offer over there. It's really good to get some feedback in terms of how long should we expect to wait before we hear back from you, because nothing makes buyers crazier than to submit an offer and then have it go into the twilight zone and you wait day after day after day without any kind of feedback. It just gets buyers angry. And they feel like they're being abused. They feel like they're being shopped. Their offer is being shopped. And sometimes it might be. And so get a deadline in terms of when you would expect to hear. Create the offer in command, right? And again, this is not a command class, but you can create that offer in command and track that through all the way through to closing in command. Consult with your buyer when the seller responds, get that counter offer back and forth. This is kind of the flow of how this goes, right? When you're representing the seller, you're going to have someone call up and let you know an offer is coming. You're going to receive the offer and ask for all offers to be presented in writing. Sometimes what you're going to hear is buyers agents are going to ask you to just float an idea. You know what? We have some interest in your property, but they're not really prepared to go full price. And could you just talk to your seller and sort of get them to just kind of let them know that we're kind of thinking somewhere in the mid threes. I know that they're just a little over 4. We're kind of thinking something in the mid threes with a 45-day close. You know, they're good qualified buyers, but could you just go kind of float that idea past your seller and see if it's even worth our time to write it up? And what I'll tell you is that's not really the best way to do this, because we want offers in writing. Verbal offers are perfectly legal. Verbal contracts, believe it or not, in the state of New Jersey are perfectly legal. I can agree to sell my car to my brother on a verbal contract and a handshake, and he gives me the money and I give him the title. The problem with verbal offers is they're not enforceable by the courts. If my brother gave me the money and I kept the title and said, "You're a dummy, you're just, I can't believe you did that," and I walk away with his money, the courts aren't going to get involved because there's no legal written document. So everything that we want it in writing, and encourage them to put it in writing, right? Get information about the buyer, find out what's really important, right? In terms of their financial strength, you know, what kind of job do they have? How secure is their job? All those different things are really important in the market that we're in right now. The question that I see in chat is, everyone submitting offers via command? Is the documentation for the offer still the sales contract? Typically, the documentation is the sales contract. Usually when I'm talking about putting the offer in command, I'm not necessarily, I don't think, talking about the actual documents. Right now, we're still in a dot loop environment for the contracts itself, and we're moving over to a DocuSign environment. But command is the place where we're going to, once that offer is in there, that we're going to track the status of it. And we're going to make sure that we're tracking it all the way to the closing, and how many dollars are involved and how much gross commission income are we adding as it relates to the goals that we have for our business. That's what I'm talking about in terms of putting it in command, right? Present the offer, you know, gather information, present the offer to your client. Every written offer has to be presented. And give feedback to the buyers now in terms of how long you anticipate before you have a response back to them. And then respond to the offer. Try to do this quickly. You know, the faster things can come together, the longer it takes to go back and forth, the more challenging things become. When you're looking to review an offer on behalf of your sellers, there's a checklist for that too. In where? The toolkit. You're going to look to make sure that the address of the house is correct, right? Did they accidentally put down the wrong house in the contract and they bought the wrong house? The price, the earnest money, how much time, you know, until acceptance? When is it closing? Do I have good, strong pre-approvals? All those different things you want to review. You're also going to want to review to make sure that the commission is accurate. You know, you're offering out 2.5% perhaps to a buyer's agent if they bring the buyer to you. What did they write in the contract? I know lots of examples where an agent chose to negotiate a higher contract than was really being offered, and nobody quite noticed it. Typically, it happens, I see it in the discount markets, where the discounters are offering out 2%, and the buyer's agent says, nuts to that, I want 2.5%. That's more common in my market, and they write 2.5% in. If the listing agent doesn't see that and correct that, if the attorneys in attorney review don't catch that and know that the offering amount was only 2%, the contract becomes the controlling document. And when that thing gets to closing, the contract says that they're getting paid 2.5%, even though the listing agreement said only 2%, even though the MLS said only 2%. Just make sure that all of that syncs up properly. Make sure that they're not asking for anything in the way of additional services or property, meaning, you know, that they write into the contract that they want to keep certain items in the house that were personal property and weren't really being intended to leave there, right? Make sure that it's clean that way, right? And there's a checklist, right? The point is, we give you all these checklists. Go ahead and take a look at those, right? The process: notify the seller, update the CMA, right? You want to, when you're reviewing an offer, just as we do for buyers, a quick little CMA to show a little bit of what's going on in the market so that the buyers can construct a good offer. it's probably time to go back and update the CMA and take a look at what the current market conditions reflect to see if this matches up as a good offer. Things change, right? Following the market changes is part of what we do for our sellers. And in the emotionally charged market like the one we're in right now, it's really hard because the CMAs that you're doing right now don't really reflect the craziness of the bidding that's going on. But do your best, update the CMA, take a look, present the offer, make sure that you look at all those different contingencies, try to protect your seller. And in the Win with Sellers course that we're running right now, session number 4 of that course is on negotiations. This is where we're going to do a really deep dive. In that course, we talk about how do you protect your seller to make sure that they're not assuming too much risk in the marketplace, and then make a decision. Either you accept, reject, or you counter, but that's the kind of flow, right? And so really quickly, consider how your ability to negotiate can impact the outcome. Your ability to negotiate is a critical skill in terms of getting deals to come together and getting deals to stay together. And a lot of us feel that we're good, strong negotiators, and many of us are. But what I will tell you is that there's a lot of us who probably could be better. Most real estate agents in the industry could be better. Negotiation is a skill that needs to be mastered. And we're going to transition in just a slide or two into really doing a quick and dirty on how to negotiate. But before I do that, I want to just go through the process again. We moved through the process part of this in terms of constructing offers quickly. We moved through the attorney review quickly. We talked about the checklists. We didn't do a deep dive on the checklist because I want you to go to the Ignite Toolkit, download those. And then if you have any specific questions of those, then feel free to jump back out, reach out to me, jump on an office hour, and we'll talk about it. But any questions that you have about the making and constructing the offer mechanics before we move on to negotiating? Going once, going twice. If not, I'm keeping an eye on chat. If not, we're going to move along. I'm going to go back to my man, Chris Voss. I talk about him a lot. He, to me, really has become the epitome of one of the great negotiators out there and is recognized in all industries as one of the finest negotiators there is. His book, Never Split the Difference, was a game changer for me, which is why I talk about it a lot. And if you don't know Chris, he is the former FBI lead international hostage negotiator. For 10 years with the FBI, if you ever were kidnapped somewhere in the world or were in a situation, God forbid, where you were held captive by bad guys in a bank robbery gone bad, it was Chris and his team that were trying to negotiate your release. And Chris has really become one of the master negotiators in the world. He's left sort of the FBI now. He owns a consulting firm called the Black Swan Group, and he consults businesses and largely around negotiating. You can get this book. I would encourage it. You can learn a lot about what he talks about. He is on so many podcasts and so many YouTube interviews. You can learn a lot of what he talks about in other channels where you don't have to buy the book. But I'd encourage you to learn. Even Masterclass. I don't know if any of you guys are fans of Masterclass, which is sort of that online learning platform, which for like $199 a year, you can log in and you can learn from the masters on all kinds of things. You want to learn how to become a better writer? Joyce Carol Oates has a couple classes. James Patterson has a couple classes. You want to learn how to barbecue? Aaron Franklin, the great Texas barbecue master of all time, has a master class on how to make brisket. Chris has a master class on negotiating. And most of the people that I know in business, interestingly enough, most of the high-level leaders in business have read the book and have taken the master class that I'm aware of. Never Split the Difference is the title. And I love the title. And if you've been in some of my other negotiating classes, the importance of this title, negotiating as if your life depends on it. We frequently think that negotiating is compromise. We frequently think that you want this, I want that, let's agree to meet in the middle. And everybody has to give up a little bit something. Everybody bleeds a little bit, but nobody bleeds to death. And that's what we think of as negotiation. We think of it as compromise. And what Chris says is that's not really skillful negotiation. Usually that kind of negotiation, it comes about because the emotional discomfort of really kind of dealing in that space where things are uncomfortable for a while, that most of us are just trying to relieve our own discomfort and try to see if we can find a compromise. Can't we all get along? Can't we all find a middle ground? What Chris says is great negotiators can't split the difference. When you're a hostage negotiator and there's 6 people being held prisoner, you can't negotiate the release of 3 of them and think that you had success. You have to get everybody out. And so what you have to do in great negotiating is constantly expand the options so that you can find a win for everyone, because no one is going to complete a negotiation if they feel that their needs are not being met, especially in a real estate negotiation. There are so many places that a deal can fail, that if a buyer or a seller feels that they're being taken advantage of, if they feel that they're being screwed, it's just not going to get to the closing table. So the art of great negotiating is to keep expanding the options and expanding the pie so that we can find a win for everyone. It's the core value of our Keller Williams business values. We call it the Y4C2Ts. W is the first letter in the Y. W stands for win-win. Win-win negotiating or no deal. If everybody can't get a win, we're not interested. This is not, I'm going to win at your expense, right? Negotiating is about finding a win for all parties. Compromise is not what we're looking for here. Now, truth be told, I want my party to win bigger than your party, but I don't want your party to walk away from the negotiation table feeling as though they had been abused. That is just a really bad outcome. First of all, people who feel that they were abused are going to trash you on the internet. You're going to have some really bad reviews online. But more importantly, they're not going to want to do business with you ever again. And your reputation is going to take it on the chin. So let's talk about the 3 Ps approach. Negotiation is a skill that can be learned and it can be perfected with experience. The best practice for negotiation and bringing the buyer and the seller together is what we call the 3 Ps approach. And I want you to write this down. The 3 Ps are prepare, position, and present. Prepare first, position your offer, and then present your offer. Those are the 3 Ps. Prepare, position, present. So it leads us to rule number 1 in the preparation phase. Negotiating rule number 1. This is Chris Voss 101. Be committed to the process, but don't be emotionally attached to the outcome. Whoever has the most to lose is going to lose. That is a rule. It is a law. It is as clear a law as gravity. You don't have to believe it. But if you choose not to believe in gravity and choose to take a step off a really high place, well, I'm sorry, but gravity is real. And this is real. Whoever has the most to lose usually loses. Why is that true? Who has heard me share this before in another class or just has an idea as to why that might really be true? Anybody?
They don't have the resources.
Well, okay. They don't have the resources. They don't have much leverage sometimes, perhaps.
Right, leverage.
But sometimes the person who's got a lot to lose has a lot of leverage. If things turn out the wrong way, though, they could lose a lot. Right? Here's why the person who has the most to lose always loses. It's because the person who has the most at risk is usually the most afraid, is usually the one who could potentially allow their emotions to get the best of them. I love this image and I'm going to share it with you. It's the elephant and the rider. And if you think about the rider kind of as the thinking part of your brain, the logic center of your brain that makes rational thoughts. If you think about this big old elephant as the emotional part of your brain, sort of the visceral part of your brain. And if you think about the environment that we're in as sort of the path that the elephant rider are taken together, here's what happens. Most of the time, the rider can control the elephant. Most of the time, the rider's in charge. Most of the time, your logical reasoning brain is in charge of how you're functioning in your day-to-day life. But make no mistake, if something happens in your environment, if something happens along the path and the elephant gets spooked, trust me, the elephant is way bigger than the rider. The elephant is way stronger than the rider, and the elephant's going to be in control. If that elephant starts to run and rampage with the rider on top, good luck. It's not going to end well. And our brain functions that way, you know, and I won't get too deep into brain chemistry and brain science right now, but your brain, when you are really jacked up in an emotional state of mind, your logical brain shuts off. There's different structures of your brain that are designed to do different things. And as a way of self-preservation, your brain was really built so that if you get into a dangerous situation and you become afraid, that you don't overthink that moment. Because if you hesitate in a dangerous situation, it could really end badly. If I'm walking across the street and I see a car coming and I suddenly have this rush of fear and I'm like, oh my God, that car's really big. Oh, look at the size of that car. I mean, if that car hit me, and if I stand in that street and I don't react quicker, I'm going to get hit. And so to prevent you from doing that, your brain, when you're emotionally charged up, shuts off your logic brain until your emotions calm back down again. Your brain then goes into emotional reaction mode. And the problem with negotiating is that it's a strategic game. And people who become the most emotional are moving their chess pieces based on emotional impulse. And it's really easy to be outmaneuvered by someone who is staying logical. The person who's got the most to lose is the most likely to become emotionally engaged. And the person who's the most emotionally engaged is going to be outmaneuvered by a more skillful, logical negotiator. And it's one of the reasons why professional negotiators, they really learn how to manage those disruptive emotions. It's the reason why, if you wanted to be an FBI hostage negotiator or a police hostage negotiator, trust me, when lives are on the line and you're the one who's negotiating for someone's release, trust me, if you're any kind of a human being, your emotions are going to get jacked up. But what professional negotiators learn how to do is they learn how to recognize that, observe that, separate themselves from that, and not react to that. It's kind of a meditative practice. And in fact, the FBI does require that their hostage negotiators meditate. It's part of the game. You have to be able to be, yoga is a little bit like this too, I think, where you learn how to observe what's going on and not judge it, not react to it, just acknowledge it. Oh, this is just Hal getting angry right now. This is Hal being afraid right now, but choose to be acting differently. And it's a little bit of emotional gymnastics. It takes practice, but I think that's what you have to do to be a great negotiator is recognize what your triggers are. Recognize how you know when you're being triggered, when you're being activated, when your emotions are starting to creep up. I know myself well enough now to know how it feels in my body. I know how it feels in my chest. I know how it feels in my gut when I'm getting activated. And that's the early warning sign for me that says, take a step back. What's going on? What's triggering you? Let's stay in logic and let's keep negotiating here, right? Rule number one, I'll say it again. I'll go back to the elephant. Be committed to the process, but not to the outcome. Whoever is the most to lose is going to lose, right? Now, to be committed to the process means that you're prepared, right? We talked about preparing to write an offer. Make sure that you've done your homework, that you've prepared. Part of what you want to negotiate when you're preparing an offer is price and its terms, right? Make sure that you've negotiated and you've thought about what matters the most to your buyers, right? And you've had a conversation with them where you really go through what's the most important thing that you want to have happen as an outcome here? What's the second most important thing? But the thing that you also have to understand is if we're going to come to a win-win, we also need to recognize that the seller also has certain things that they want, that they need to have happen in order for this to be a win for them too. One of the things that we recognize when we start negotiating is we don't always know what matters to the other side. It's a little bit like playing poker. I started to put this slide up and I pulled it back for a second because here's the image. When you're playing poker and you got two kings showing and two kings under your hand here, you got a really damn good hand, especially if that looks like an ace right there with it. And so you don't want people to see your cards because you want people to throw in because you're going to reveal that you've got, four kings and an ace and you're going to win the hand. The point is the most important information is rarely on the table in the beginning. And one of the things that we just have to recognize is that the sooner we can get that information on the table, the easier it is to find common ground, the easier it is to find a win for all people. And so it's really important to keep in mind, in negotiating rule number 2, don't be so tied to the outcome that you think you want that you're not open to a better option when one emerges, because the most important information is not on the table yet. I don't know what it's going to take on your side, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, to get this deal done. Because I don't know that, I don't really know what's possible. Once I find out what matters to you, then perhaps we could find a different path to a different outcome that I even thought was possible right now. How does that look in real time? In real time, I shared this in I think the Win with Buyers class recently. My daughter is 26, one of her best friends, a few months before COVID kind of went into lockdown. She and her fiance bought their very first house, a starter house, beautiful little Cape. It was all fixed up and it was beautiful. And one of the things that we did was we reached out to the seller's agent first. And this is what I'm going to encourage you to do. We reached out to the seller's agent first before we constructed the offer. And we said, of all the things that we could do to make this offer exciting for your seller to receive, what's the most important thing? That's the question. Before I write my offer, I know what matters to my buyers, but I want to go to the other side and I want to ask them what really what matters to your seller in order to put an offer together that they'd like to get. And when you get that answer, which is probably going to be, show me the money, which it was with my daughter's friend. I called the agent. I said, what's the most important thing? They said, you know what? They're selling this house. They built a new house and they don't want to carry two houses. While certainly closing quickly is important, getting the most out of this house is the most important thing. Give us a good financial strong offer, and so be it. Then I said, what else? And that's the follow-up question. What else? Because I want to know what else. And when I heard what else, they said, well, we want to close quickly because he doesn't want to carry two houses. And we want to make sure that your buyers are really financially sound because we don't want this deal falling apart and then going back onto the market and forcing him to carry two houses longer. And what I began to find was by asking those questions, I started to be able to peek under the hand of the cards that were being held on the other side. And it gave us an opportunity to go back and craft our offer in such a way that we gave them some of what they wanted, but not everything, because we needed to keep some of the things back so that when we get to home inspections, if I have to negotiate home inspections, if I have to give something up in negotiating the home inspections, I've got something that I can trade for getting the repairs that I want. Asking what's important to the other side is a really good thing to do, but don't be so tied to what you think you want that you're not open to a better option. And here's how it played out for my daughter's friend. We knew that they wanted a strong financial offer with strong financial candidates and a quick, solid close, which we were able to do. When I asked the agent, was there any flexibility though in price? If we gave them a very strong 20% down offer with A credit buyers, and kudos to them, 27 and 28 years old, they had 20% to put down and they had strong credit and they had good jobs. And they didn't lose their jobs during COVID, fortunately. We put together a strong offer. We put together great closing terms, but we held back on price a little bit because we wanted to see if they needed a lot of stuff when they moved in. They didn't have any furniture. They didn't, so they needed some money, even though the house didn't need much repairs. And what we found in the negotiations were that he wasn't willing to come off his price. He really was going to be full price, or he didn't really want to hear from us. And so here's what we did. We negotiated. Rule number 2, don't be so tied to the outcome you think you want that you're not open to a better option. In order to come up to full price, the question became, what are you willing to do for us to make that happen? And what we were able to negotiate was a house full of furniture. They were holding back on the price because they needed to go out and buy furniture. If we're going to give you the price, then give us your furniture. And we got a kitchen set and a dining room set and 2 bedroom sets and 3 flat screen TVs and a living room sofa and a table and all that stuff, because we weren't so locked in that said, no, we have to go this price because this is what we need. Once we found that what was important to them, we were able to find another option that made it a win for everybody. That's kind of the art of how negotiation can look, right? So in order to do that preparation, learn what matters to your party, to learn what matters to your folks, ask open-ended questions as opposed to closed-ended questions, right? Closed-ended questions are questions that don't really keep the conversation moving. Open-ended questions that have lots of different responses, right? What additional information do you want to know from folks? What's important about closing in that time frame? How would you feel if this happened? Asking those open-ended questions to be really clear about what matters to your side, and then ask open-ended questions as well of the other side, so that you can kind of find out where are the options, right? Where are the options, right? What do you want to know about the other side when you call up the listing agent? Well, let me ask you this before we go into this, and I have a list here, I think. What do you want to know? When you call up the listing agent and you're prepared to write an offer, and you're going to ask them certainly what's important, but what else do you want to know besides what's important to get this deal closed? Is there anything else you'd like to know? Any other things that you'd like to know before you start negotiating? How about this?
I think it's helpful. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Natalie. I want to hear your version.
I think it might be helpful also to understand, in addition to everything in their financials, is when to actually vacate the premises. Because I come across a few things where people are looking not to leave right away, and some are.
Sure. Right.
And then my buyers also need that time as well. So the timeline, it also helps to know that.
What's the best timeline for all the parties? Absolutely. It's a great thing. Make sure that it's on your checklist of questions to ask, right? But I like to ask questions too, things like, are you currently negotiating an offer with anyone else? Have you had any offers that you've categorically rejected? And would you be willing to share anything about those offers? Here's the thing that I'll tell you. As a fiduciary, and we're fiduciaries, guys, remember the rules of fiduciary, the abbreviation old car. If you remember that from real estate school, O stands for obedience. I'm going to do what you tell me to do as long as it's legal and not unethical. L, loyalty. I'm going to put your needs above mine. D, disclosure. I'm going to share any kind of information that I can find to give you a leg up in the negotiation process. And the cousin of disclosure is the C in old car, confidentiality. Anything that is important that you would want to keep private, I'm going to keep it confidential. And, what I'll tell you sometimes is that whether or not you're negotiating with somebody else is confidential information. You don't have the right to know that answer. But I do. And the reason for that is this. If I say to the listing agent, are you negotiating an offer? And they come back and say, yes, we are. There's a chance my buyer is going to say, look, I don't want to get caught up into a bidding war. I know that those can become emotionally charged. I know that buyers can sometimes spend way more than they need to. If you're already negotiating with somebody else, then I'm going to move on. If that deal falls apart, come back and talk to me, but I'm not going to get into a bidding war. And there's a chance that revealing that information could have just scared away a buyer who was prepared to give them a far better offer than they already had on the table. So disclosing the presence of existing offers is something that you only can do as a listing agent with the permission and consent of the seller. Now, that said, I really do believe that in order to generate the best outcome for my seller, then I need for the buyers to know if there is legitimate competition, that they know that there's competition. Because if you don't know there's competition, you're not going to feel compelled to act faster and act stronger. I'm not going to lie. I can't lie and say that there's offers on the table when there's not. And I do believe that sometimes happens. You'll hear that. But I want to find out, right? And here's what I know. Most agents are going to say too much. Don't be that agent that says too much. But most agents who aren't really thinking about this, they're just going to reveal too much. And my feeling is, as a fiduciary for my buyers, I'm going to give the listing agent an opportunity to disclose too much. And I'm going to expect that they're not going to. I'm going to expect that they're only going to share what they have permission to share. I'm not going to be offended or surprised or disappointed if they come back and say, you know what? That's a great question, but it's not one that we're really in a position to entertain right now. Let's just put an offer on paper and let's start the conversation. That's, I think, what a professional typically will say. However, I'm going to ask, I want to know, and recognize that now, if they are negotiating an offer, I think best practice usually becomes have some structure around what that looks like. Usually what we see happen as best practice, not always, but usually is keep the offer period open till a deadline and then review all of the offers at a set date and time. We're going to accept offers until 12 o'clock on Thursday. And on 12 o'clock Thursday, we're going to review them. And then you can come back in a second round of people that you want to go back and make a counter offer to, or you could set that up as, we're going to leave the deadline as 12 o'clock on Thursday and give us your final and best offer, because we're not going to come back and renegotiate. We're just going to accept from what we see, and whoever has the best offer wins. You can do it any kind of way you want to. But if the listing agent does reveal that they are in fact negotiating with another party, then you're entitled to know a little bit more information. One of the pieces of information that you're entitled to know under the Code of Ethics is, are you negotiating one of your own clients? And if you are negotiating an offer for one of your own clients, does a dual commission agreement exist in place where you will take a reduced commission if you bring your own client rather than what the seller would pay if another client comes through, right? It's not uncommon or illegal or inappropriate to say, I'm going to charge you 6%. And if I bring the buyer myself, because I'm going to work both sides of the deal, then I'll only take 5%. The reason why the Code of Ethics requires that information to be revealed, if there's been an acknowledgement of that you're negotiating one of your own. Again, they don't have to acknowledge it, but if they do, it's because the code requires that people are all treated fairly. And if you accept if you get two exact offers, exactly the same in terms of dollars and terms, and yet the seller is going to net more money if they accept yours than they would net if they accepted mine, then we're not on an equal playing field. And in order to be seen as treated fairly, then my buyers need to know that commission differential exists and what the percentage difference would be, so that they could adjust their offer upward to be competitive if they chose to, right? Those are the kinds of things that I think it's important to ask. Do you have any offers? Have you rejected any offers? What's the most important thing for your seller? We touched on that. What's the most important thing that your sellers want to see in order to get this deal done? And when you get that answer, don't stop there. It's what else and what else. Try to reveal as many cards as you can so that you can go back and construct an offer that gives them some of what they want so that they're happy, but not everything that they want yet. So you've got some leverage, and that's how you prepare, right? That's how you prepare. And you start to think through scenarios with your buyer or your sellers. What would happen if this? What would happen if an offer came in this price range? What would happen if they asked you to make this kind of a concession? Or when they do have something that's really that they've acknowledged is important to them, help understand, why is this important? Is there anything that's more important? Let's prioritize these things so that I make sure that we get the things that are most important for you, right? It's all part of the preparation time, is having these conversations with our buyers and sellers, right? So now I have a couple of poll questions here. There's 11 of us in the room here. I'm going to go to a poll question, if I can find it, called the 3 Ps of negotiating. Now remember, early on in these slides, we discussed the 3 Ps of negotiating, and we outlined what they were. I asked you to write them down. Which is not one of the 3 Ps of negotiating? It's only one. We're going to leave this poll open for about 30 seconds, and I want you to just answer. There we go. I'm unmuted. Yeah, I lost my internet for about 20 seconds. It stopped. The lights internet dropped out, and then it came back on. So here I am again.
Glad to have you back.
Welcome back.
Well, it's good to be back, and it's good to know that you didn't all disappear while I was gone. So here's the thing. You guys finished the poll. Let's end the poll. I don't know if you can see this now, but you guys got that right. You know, practice was the one that you said wasn't one of the 3 Ps. And it's not. Now, we do have to practice. Make no mistake. We've got to practice, because negotiating is a skill, right? Presenting an offer, practicing this stuff. I hear people say all the time, you play the way you practice. And so we've got to keep practicing. But the 3 Ps did not include practice. It was the others there. So let me see if I can get back into the PowerPoint here. Stick with me, because I hope that the PowerPoint is still accessible here. Looks like it is. Do you guys see it again? Did Zoom let me? There's that thumb again. I like that thumb. All right. First is prepare the offer. Now position the offer, right? And so the checklist for writing the offer, we talked about those checklists before. Make sure it's well positioned in terms of price and terms. Make sure that you've given them some of the things that they want, but not all the things that they want. offer writing guidelines. We're trying to find a win-win for everybody, right? Now, the guideline is this: try to get to a meeting of the minds quickly. Because I put the piggy bank up here. This is what I call the piggy bank of goodwill. In every beginning of a real estate transaction, the parties are usually, and they like each other. They're happy with each other. There's goodwill there. What happens though is with every concession, with every delay, with every counteroffer, there's a little bit of a withdrawal that comes out of the piggy bank of goodwill. And we've got to make sure that this relationship between buyer and seller and agents and attorneys stays in a good enough place that we can shepherd this thing all the way to the closing table. If at any point the piggy bank goes bust, then the deal's going to fail. And one of the places that it fails before it even gets started is it just takes too many steps back and forth to come to an agreement in the beginning. Too many times I see a buyer and a seller that finally get to a meeting of the minds. They come to an agreement, but they're so agitated with each other already before they even get into attorney review that they never seem to survive attorney review. The more you do in the preparation phase to find out what matters the most to all the different parties to the best of your ability to construct an offer that's a pretty good offer. It may not be everything yet, but it's pretty good. The faster you're going to be able to come to an agreement and keep that relationship intact, right? Negotiations about managing risk. Great negotiators position their offer in a way that assumes some risk, right? But not so much risk that they're going to be in danger. And when you're representing a buyer that you've got to, especially in a market condition like we have right now, where inventory is tight, there's a lot of competition. Buyers don't really have a lot of leverage. Just getting the house is a win, not necessarily getting it at a discount. You know, sometimes in order to make your offer more attractive, you've got to be willing to take some risk away from the seller. If you can't come up in dollars, what else would you do? Maybe what you would do is you would put some limits around home inspections. And by limiting them, kind of minimizing the risk that the seller could be exposed to when inspection time comes. We always use the phrase in this industry that we don't want the buyers to nickel and dime the sellers. And I think we understand to some extent what nickel and diming means. It means, you know, don't come after me for little things. And sometimes what we say when we're representing buyers is that we're only going to look for structural and environmental things. Everything else is going to be not on the table. But even that's not clear enough. I think what really helps in terms of managing risks is to put some dollar limits around that, to say things like, you know, we will put in the contract that when we come to home inspection time, that there needs to be a certain threshold before we would ask for a repair. Meaning, if the item doesn't, you know, take at least $500 to correct, then we're not even going to worry about it. That gives a real clear definition of what nickel and diming looks like, right? Because sometimes people interpret that differently. Or we're going to take a look at this review and we may ask you to come back and repair certain things. However, we're going to put a cap on no more than $2,000 worth of total repair costs so that you can know what to expect, right? And that might make an offer more attractive. Waiving a appraisal contingency could make an offer more attractive. I'm seeing that done right now because the bidding wars are taking these offers into places that are quite frankly not logically defensible. And sometimes sellers are saying, look, there's a really good chance that the price I'm willing to pay you isn't going to be supported in the appraisal. And if that happens, if the house underappraises, what that means then is that the lender is only going to give me a percentage, not of the purchase price, but of the appraised value. If I'm on an 80-20 loan, meaning I'm putting 20% down and I'm borrowing 80%, and I offer you $500,000, then I'm putting down $100,000, I'm borrowing $400,000. But if the appraisal comes back and says it's not worth $500,000, it's only worth $450,000, what that means is the bank is going to give me 80% of $450,000, not 80% of $500,000, which means I'm short. And when you waive the appraisal contingency, what it says is, even if it's short, if I don't get as much money from the bank as I thought I needed, don't worry about it. I've got other resources. I've got other funds. And sometimes you'll take on that kind of risk to make your offer more attractive. Negotiating is always about managing risk. How much risk is the least amount of risk that I need to take so that I can get what I want. And the thing that dictates that is the demand in the market. When absorption rates are low, when demand is high, buyers have to take on more risk. They have to go to higher prices. They have to take homes that are in less good condition. When demand is really low and there's not much inventory, and there's a lot of inventory rather, when there's not much buying activity, then sellers are going to have to take some risk. I may have to take a less good offer to get this deal done. Which brings us to negotiating rule number 3, never give anything away without getting something back of equal or greater value. And that's the description of what I shared before with the negotiation of the house full of furniture for my daughter's friend. Is okay, if we have to give you something, we want something back. What is it that you're going to do to incentivize us to give you what you want? Which is why having some cards to play still is really important. Create the offer in command. We talked about that. And again, it's not the offer documents. It's creating the offer in command so that you can track it through to the closing and do that in command. And then presenting the offer. Again, we touched on this before. There's the process. Notify the listing agent that it's coming, present in person when you're able to, send the offer to the agent, define a deadline, create the offer in command, consult with the buyers and seller response. The reason why we negotiate in language. I don't want to play telephone game here. I want to be able to kind of do that. The 738-55 rule says this: 7% of the communication is the words. Only 7%. 38% of communication is how are those words delivered? What is the tone of my voice? What's the rate of my speech? Do I sound angry? You know, that's important in communication. 55% of communication is body language and nonverbals. Is what are you reading in my body language? What are you reading in what I'm not saying? What's the vibe that I'm giving off? And it's just too hard to tune in to that 55% communication if we're not in the same space. That's why I am a big fan of negotiating in person, to try to tune into all of these things. If you can't do it in person, try to do it in Zoom. If you can't do it on Zoom, try to do it on a conference call or a Skype call or whatever you can do to leverage as much of these different channels as you can. The phrase that I use here, I never said he stole the money, is one that just sort of talks about how when you take the inflection of your voice, it changes the entire communication. I never said he stole the money. 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 Every one of those sentences meant something entirely different. And yet it was the same set of words. And what happens is when we rely on written communication, especially in emotionally charged times, people misinterpret what we're saying. I had a call the other night, and I won't say who from, probably not anybody on this call right now, but a call came one evening last week from a very experienced agent who was negotiating a very emotionally challenging, high net worth luxury property negotiation. And the long and the short of it is that they were at an impasse, and it was getting really testy and really ugly. And the buyer insisted that the listing agent insisted that the buyer's agent throw in commission as a way of bridging the gap between the price that the buyer was willing to pay. And it was just something that we talked about, how to respond to that. And the agent was fired up and she was agitated. And when we finally talked about how to respond, her immediate response was, I'm going to send him that in an email. And I'm like, please don't do that, because in the email, they're going to misinterpret what you're saying. You've got to be willing as a negotiator to kind of behave like a firefighter. When everybody else is running out of the building, the firefighter is running in. We have got to be willing to sit with our disruptive emotions, recognize they're there, not let them become disruptive, acknowledge them, but we've got to stay in the moment and communicate and get things done. I will tell you, having been a manager in other companies, owning my own companies, the times where clients get the most upset with us as agents is when they feel like we're hiding behind text messaging and voicemail. when things are get emotional. That's when they get really kind of fired up with us. So don't do that. The cover letter we talked about, representing the seller. Again, we talked about this before. Receive the offer, gather information about the buyer, present the offer to the client, respond quickly, and then use this checklist to review the offers. That's about where we're going to park this here, guys. I kind of morphed 2 slide decks together, which is to some extent why those slides repeated themselves. But absent the minute or two where I jumped off, thanks to Verizon Fios, I'm just looking for any feedback, any ahas today. When I put this up on the YouTube channel later on, I'll try to edit that little break out. But any ahas, any things that you learned today or things that you're thinking differently about in terms of either how to construct an offer or how to present one and negotiate one? I'd love a couple of ahas from someone. And you don't all have to rush at once. Going once? Sandra, I hear your voice. Go ahead.
No, I just, you just say a lot of really good, valuable information. I just feel like it's so important about that doing that CMA to support the buyer, to make them feel comfortable about the offer they're making. And, this way they know what's out there in the market, what properties are being sold for. I realized in this session how important that is.
And I'm going to just anchor one other thought to that, though, because it really is, Sandy. And the thing is that this market we're in right now is so emotionally charged that our CMA reviews are maybe not necessarily predictive enough.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I just want to make sure when we're doing CMAs like that is that we ultimately use the data to support what makes sense, but then acknowledge the fact that this market right now isn't really making a lot of sense. And so the big ultimate question is, at what point are you willing to walk away? Mm-hmm. How far could you go and lose it and say, at that price, it wasn't worth it to me?
Right.
Because you may have to go to that number in this market. Or what would happen if you had to go to that number? Would you be willing to go to that number? If that number is not supported by these comps, are you willing to take that chance and take that risk to get one right now? Those are the kinds of consulting questions that we just need to get comfortable having, right? But yeah, doing that CMA is really important so that it's based in some kind of reality. Because our buyers are emotional when we're doing this. They're excited. And excitement is another emotion that can throw the rider off of the elephant, right? So we use the logic of the CMA to try to help anchor that to some extent.
Yeah, absolutely.
I see Janine says, learn to be a good negotiator. Yeah, you know what? It is true. It's a skill that is not inherent. It has to be learned. It's technique. And it has to be practiced. And, I think that the better you get at that, the better it's going to be. Again, go get Chris's book. I just think his book has been a game changer. It really has. I think now it's safe to say that he's really recognized across all industries as probably one of the strongest negotiators in the world, which he'd probably have to be an FBI hostage negotiator, I would say. But I think his stuff translates. His ideas translate into business in such a clean way that I think it's worth reading that book or taking his masterclass or just checking him out on YouTube, right?